It was 1963, a warm summer's night in the heart of the English countryside. The biggest robbery of all time was about to take place.
I saw the lights of the train coming towards me, picked up the walkie-talkie and said, "This is it, this is it, this is it."
Bruce Reynolds was the mastermind behind this audacious plan. A plan so well executed, the gang fled with a staggering £2.6 million. How did they do it? This is the story from the man who organized it all.
First I heard about it was, of course, on the radio news. It came up to say that a Royal Mail train had been hijacked in Buckinghamshire, and it was thought that rather a lot of money might have been stolen. What an understatement that turned out to be.
All day, scores of cars, motorcycles, bicycles have been arriving at the gates of Leatherslade Farm, where the mail bandits hid with their loot for a few days after the train ambush.
It was Buster that woke me up, and he said it's 2.5 million plus, you know.
The council chamber has been packed all day. Piled in a corner, a great stack of exhibits: an axe, 3 pickaxe handles, mailbags, boiler suits, sleeping bags, and 8 tea chests crammed with yet more exhibits.
The Fleet Street Press was styling it the crime of the century. 2.6 million was stolen. Today would be about £33 million.
The Great Train Robbery entered the history books when a highly organized gang stole millions of pounds from a Royal Mail train. In just 30 minutes, 15 men had hijacked the travelling post office and offloaded the cash. But its success was down to its perfect planning. Well-known career criminal Bruce Reynolds believed he was just the man for the job.
I was recognised as a face in the underworld. I was 32, full of use, so it was just really a question of finding the right, as we used to call it, a piece of work. We wasn't that far away from the end of the Second World War, so when they say swinging 60s, it was certainly swinging 60s. I was drinking in the Star Belgravia with Billy Hill, industrialists, film producers, all those debutantes that like to mix with a bit of rough. I was going to the same tailor that Cary Grant went to in driving sports cars of all types at that time, because that was also a mark of who you were in the world. There's a network that was supplying the inner circle of thieves with information.
One of these thieves was Gordon Goody, a well-established criminal with good contacts in the underworld. His connections with the solicitor provided the key Bruce needed.
A crooked solicitor said that he'd got information about a possible major robbery. He knew about a mail train coming from Glasgow to London. He said that the figure that had been mentioned to him had been 1 million to 6 million. As a thief, this is what you're looking for all your life. This is a chance to fulfill, let's say, romantic fantasies, and also enable me to literally retire from crime.
When jobs like this turned up, you either had the contacts to make it happen or let the opportunity pass you by. Bruce grabbed it with both hands. This was serious cash. Well known in the criminal underworld, he was fresh from a robbery at Heathrow Airport.
I'd been involved, or wanting for questioning, as the euphemism goes, by Scotland Yard over the airport robbery. It was a well-organised robbery, and as I say, it got great press acclaim. Met up with my friends, and of course, My enthusiasm infected the others to an extent. I said, we've got to get to work, and we've got to get to work with something that's going to be worthwhile. I was the motivator. I was the one who had the enthusiasm. I was the one that made sure everything was looked at from my point of view rather than leave it to someone else.
But a robbery on this scale was going to take some doing. It wasn't a job for opportunists. It needed the right team. And Bruce knew just the men. 31-year-old Charlie Wilson was a big-time criminal who Bruce had worked with before. 34-year-old Ronnie Biggs was a one-time carpenter turned small-time crook. Crucially, he could supply a much-needed driver for the train. 32-year-old Buster Edwards was a former boxer and nightclub owner and a long-time confidant of Bruce, a man he knew he could trust. What none of them knew was that this robbery would make them household names.
The nucleus of it was all people that I'd worked with on previous robberies, and you know, they knew how to keep their mouths shut and security-minded.
Making up the rest of the core team was Jimmy White and Thomas Daly.
When things had to be sort of drawn out, Buster wasn't living at home. He'd rented a flat in Twickenham, and we'd have meetings over there where Blackbird was brought out, and you know, you'd point out what the situation was, and you know, literally thrash it out. The idea was formed. As there at Bicester, there was an army barracks that if we had been interviewed by the police, you know, we was dressed like roughly sort of more military than railway. I was in charge of the operation as the major, and I would inform the policemen that we were on a military exercise.
Bruce quickly realized he needed more men he could rely on. Stopping a 135-ton locomotive was going to need a few heavies.
If there's 1 to 6 million, we need bodies to handle the bags. Plus, if things do go wrong on the track, we've got something like 80 people on the train to contend with. We wanted someone who knew railway procedures, who knew how to stop the train for sure. So Buster knew the South Coast Raiders, he knew 1 or 2 of them, and he knew they'd got a guy, Roger Caudry, who'd arranged for various methods where they'd stopped trains successfully on the South Coast line. So you have the big guys, they're the attack team, and the little guys are the technicians.
The gang was in place, 15 men, all ready for a slice of the action. But months of planning lay ahead, and in the underworld where secrets are hard to keep, Bruce was desperate to keep this one well under wraps.
What you're trying to do is not to excite any attention and keep a low profile, and if you're going to meet, particularly in large numbers, you've got to devise some sort of method. I mean, we used it to take a ball over to Wimbledon Common and, you know, kick it around a little bit, and then you go into a huddle when you say, this is the plan. One of my mentors said to me, Bruce, you've got to think you're a spy in an enemy country and behave accordingly, that everyone is out to catch you in some way or another. So when we had sort of meetings, we kept it as little as possible that we weren't together at any particular time.
Bruce knew people he could trust, but that wasn't enough. He had to know more about the Royal Mail train and its contents. An old contact proved to be the inside link he needed.
It was well known that the railways carried a lot of money at various times, but to get the specific information is very difficult. Just the mere fact you know that trains carry money, well, that's not good enough. I went to see a contact of mine who was only a porter at Waterloo Station, and he outlined to me what trains came in with money, and there was what he termed the money train. He didn't know how much was on board, But what he did know, there had to be a lot of money because of the police presence when the train was unloaded.
The pieces were fitting together, but the perfect robbery wouldn't be a success if the perfect location couldn't be found, and time was running out. Bruce set to work visiting potential spots to hijack the train.
A lot of them were quite content, you know, to let me do the donkey work, to let me look at where we could stop the train. I found what I thought was the perfect spot. It was adjacent to a B road where there was a bridge with a culvert. The perfect spot to stop the train and unload it. The place we'd chosen, it really adjoined 3 counties, which of course always makes it difficult if a robbery has taken place. The counties get mixed up, who's handling it.
The location was spot on, but he also needed a base and somewhere to split the cash. He found it at Leatherslade Farm.
The decision was made that we should find a place where we could hide out rather than drive back home. It was 17 miles as the crow flied from Brinks Bridge to Leatherslade Farm. The crooked solicitor said he got someone who would buy the farm for us. A deposit was put down and we were allowed the keys to actually go ahead with it. So we sorted out where the train was going to be stopped. We worked out where the hideout was. We worked out a route from Brinks Bridge where the robbery would take place. With that, I think virtually everything was complete.
Everything was set. Months of preparation all came down to this one night. If it went to plan, the 15-strong gang would be made for life. But if it went wrong...
How you sort of make your mark in any walk of life, whatever your profession, is by results. We'd got 2 Land Rovers, both with the same registration plates. Perfect night, beautiful weather, countryside, you know, it was absolutely marvellous.
But just as the atmosphere intensified and the gang got into position, a message came through to put everything on hold. It looked like it was all over before it had even begun. It was the night of the biggest heist of all time. A gang of prolific criminals was about to hijack a Royal Mail train carrying millions of pounds. But just as everybody was ready to go, word came through to wait.
We've been told a date, the August bank holiday. Everyone was at the farm. Someone cycled out to a village some couple of miles away and phoned through the contact. And he said, no, you have to wait till tomorrow. After a bank holiday, obviously there's spending all over the country. So banks had excess money.
It took the banks a few days to collect the extra money for transportation to London, which meant a jackpot even more than originally thought.
So the contact said, you have to wait till tomorrow. That's when the major money is coming through. It was a day later than it should have been.
The promise of more money was enticing, but in the meantime, the gang had to sit and occupy themselves.
Then we had a lull, really, in the enthusiasm. 24 hours delay meant people started thinking, hold on a minute, the enormity of this crime we're about to commit could have devastating results with us. So there was a bit of rallying that had to be done.
Bruce's reputation kept the gang's morale together. They trusted his word and laid low at their hideout for 24 hours.
You're part of a group, you know. You can't suddenly say, I don't want to be in it now. You lose face with your comrades. They knew my provenance, you know. They knew that I was a very sound man. They knew that I'd been quite successful in lots of robberies.
This was the biggest job of Bruce's criminal career. Everyone knew the drill. They went in hard, each man armed with a kosh, but it was to prove a mistake.
So I was playing my role. It was like a commando raid. I was dressing the part, even wearing a SAS beret. We left the farm, perfect night, beautiful weather, countryside, you know, it was absolutely marvellous.
But how were they going to stop a fast train without anyone noticing? The answer? Get the driver to do it. First, a glove would be used to cover the green light. Then the red signal would be rewired so it was under the gang's control. Next, the train would be stopped at Cheddington, where the two front carriages would be uncoupled and driven down the line to Bridigo Bridge, where finally, the high-value sacks containing all the loot would be unloaded into the waiting vehicles. There was no time for any mistakes.
We was in position by about 3:30. The train comes through at 3 o'clock. So we had half an hour to cut all the telephone wires. We completely isolated the whole area as regards contact. So we knew that we'd have, you know, something like a minimum of a half an hour start before people got off the train. It was really just a question then of splitting up. The attack team were at Bridigo Bridge. I was further up the track to identify the train. It was all coming to fruition. I knew that whatever happened in the next sort of half an hour was going to change my life forever.
Now it was simply a case of waiting. As soon as the train could be seen in the distance, it was all systems go.
I saw the lights of the train coming towards me, picked up the walkie-talkie and said, "This is it, this is it, this is it."
My job on the night of the robbery was to sort letters for South East London in the 5th coach from the front of the train. Well, being after the bank holiday, there was extra mail on board. We normally only carried 30 to 40 high-value bags on a normal day, but after the bank holiday, there was between 120 and 130. There was a lot of pressure on, and there was extra staff employed to deal with the pressure.
When we got to where the red signal was at the gantry, the train ground to a halt. Paddy and I are sitting in the Land Rover just waiting to see the train and its 2 carriages pull away from the other 10 carriages that form the train. For a moment, you know, it was silence.
British Rail were doing major engineering work on the West Coast Main Line, so no one took much notice of the train coming to a stop.
The mail train was carrying over 70 staff, too many people for the gang to take on. The front carriages needed to be detached and moved so as not to arouse suspicion and buy the robbers time. But uncoupling a train requires experts and time, neither of which the gang had.
Then we heard sort of clanking as the train was taken apart, and very, very slowly, almost imperceptibly, the engine and the 2 coaches and 1 container high-value packages pulled away from the rest of the train, and with that, we then drove up to Bridigo Bridge.
The gang needed to move fast. They'd lost ground detaching the carriages and in the hurry had burst some pipes. Little did Bruce know that the driver had also been attacked in the rush.
And the next thing I knew was a mastermind was climbing up the steps. I grappled with him and I almost forced him off the footplate, but I was struck from behind by another. The next thing I remember, I was on my knees on the floor, and I was told to get in my driving seat, take the train forward and not look up.
We'd attended to Mills, who'd been hurt in the attack, and his fireman, who hadn't been hurt at all. They were handcuffed on the embankment. I think Charlie Wilson gave one of them a cigarette, put a bit of a bandage round his head.
I walked through to the front of the train to see what was going on, and in the leading coach I noticed that the gangway door was open, and that's where the high value coach and the stowage vehicle and the loco had come detached, and it was quite a way down the line. But at that particular time there was nothing sinister apparent.
Inside the train, the male workers remained oblivious to what was going on.
Charlie Wilson opened the door and a chain was formed and the bags started coming down the embankment, passed from one man to another, onto the back of the army lorry. I kept checking my watch to make sure everything was all right. I'd allowed half an hour to unload the train. We'd got to 120 bags and I checked my watch and said, that's it. Someone said, well, there's 8 bags left behind. I said, well, we've got a timetable, we'll stick to it. And with that, the 8 bags were left there and we drove off to Let Us Say Farm.
The gang had done it. They'd shifted over 2 tons of cash in half an hour. As they drove off with millions of pounds, the workers on the rest of the mail train began to realize something was very wrong.
After about 40 minutes, a member of the staff that was in the high value coach, he came back to the main portion of the train and said that robbers had attacked the high value coach and that they had taken most of the high value bags. Had he not done that, no one on the train would have been any the wiser.
It was a beautiful night and I could vaguely hear people were singing in the lorry behind and they were singing the Tony Bennett number, The Good Life.
The officer in charge of the travelling post office, he detailed 2 postmen to go to a local house and raise the alarm. Everybody was in total shock that it could happen, that the Queen's mail had been taken.
The largest robbery in British history had been pulled off by Bruce Reynolds and his gang of train robbers. 120 mail bags containing more than £2 million had been stolen from a Royal Mail train in just 30 minutes. As workers on the train were left dumbstruck, the 15 robbers thought they were home and dry.
It was almost like I smelt victory. We had a VHF receiver. Just as we pulled in the farm, it came over on the police message. It said, you won't believe this, they've just stolen a train.
I mean, when I got there, all there was part of the train and post office workers all looking out the window, wondering what the hell's gone on.
The first I heard about it was, of course, on the radio news. It came up to say that a Royal Mail train had been hijacked in Buckinghamshire, and it was thought that rather a lot of money might have been stolen. What an understatement that turned out to be.
We finished up doing the fingerprint side. The actual track had to be photographed, the signals, which have all been interfered with. The wires on the telephone were cut.
As the sheer scale of the raid dawned on the local police forces, the gang was tucked away at its hideout.
All the bags were stacked up inside. Contrary to what you've seen in films, it was no loose money, it was all parcelled up in individual parcels, so there was a job for someone to open them all up and count what we'd got. I think it was almost verging on sort of a euphoric hysteria. August the 8th, which was Ronnie Big's birthday. So, you know, everyone was sort of making gestures towards Ronnie, you know. There's a tenner, you know, there's 1,500 quid, you know. I mean, that was it. It was just sort of playing with Monopoly, which indeed had been one of the pursuits to kill the time up there.
But for Bruce, the excitement of pulling off the crime of the century quickly subsided.
I was then absolutely sort of shattered, and I went upstairs and said, give us a call when you know how much we've got. And I virtually collapsed onto the bed. And that's when, if you like, the euphoria of success faded a little bit. And, you know, it was almost like an anticlimax. I thought, well, we've done it, you know, what do I do now?
But just as Bruce was contemplating his next move, so were the police.
One of the robbers ordered the men on the train, stay in here for half an hour. Superintendent Futrell said, well, that was probably the half hour that they needed to get from the scene of the crime to their hideout. He had already got a clear idea in his head that the robbers would still be within the vicinity.
This throwaway comment may well have been their undoing. As the local forces scrambled to respond, the robbers had only one thing on their minds: the cash that would set them up for life.
I think it was Buster that woke me up, and he said it's 2.5 million plus, you know. So I said to him, you know, how do you feel about that? And he said, I think that'd do very nicely indeed.
Bloody right.
Good.
Every gang member had an equal share of the loot, 150 grand, the equivalent of a staggering £3 million each today. As daylight broke just hours after the raid, most of the gang settled in to let the heat die down, but Bruce had his own plans.
We got contingencies that we might have to stay there some length of time. Hence, the place was well provisioned, more or less to last a siege of a month. But I left the farm the next morning and I hitched a ride into Tame, and I had 2 women friends who were antique dealers drive up with a van, and the bags was put into the back of the van. They drove off to London with it.
Bruce had a well-laid plan and stuck to it. For him, once the job had been completed, the safest option was for everyone to go his own way, quietly. While Bruce put his plan into action, he left the rest of the gang to its own devices.
Once the robbery was over, it's a dissolution of the team altogether. Everyone was going to make their own separate ways. There was a hint of madness about the whole robbery because we'd been in the frame, obviously, for the airport robbery, and the same degree of planning was present with the train robbery. So it was pretty obvious, you know, that we were going to get calling cards from Scotland Yard.
As Bruce made his quick exit, the others tried to adjust to their newfound wealth, unaware that their actions had made waves in the small village.
The local farm worker down at Oakley had become a bit uncomfortable and a bit suspicious of some comings and goings that he'd been seeing at the vacated Leatherslade farm. He had seen people working who, when asked, showed themselves to be prospective builders, decorators, doing work on the farm, ready for the new owner to move in some weeks later. Whoever it was, they seemed to have left some vehicles up there which he knew didn't belong to the previous owner. They were a couple of Land Rovers and also an open-backed Austin lorry. And so he had phoned in, and after describing what he had seen, you know, it was an attitude of, well, this might be worth your while to go and have a look at that.
The farm worker knew the area well, and if he was suspicious, it was worth taking a look. But had the robbers fled in time?
I opened the back door. We were in the kitchen, and that kitchen was absolutely chock-a-block with foodstuffs and provisions. It was everywhere. I'd seen a lot of sacks down in the cellar, and if those sacks contain the money that was stolen from the train, is it likely that having got it this far, the robbers are going to leave it unattended? And I started to think to myself, well, perhaps they haven't gone. Perhaps they're out amongst those trees, amongst those outbuildings, watching me. I'd got no illusions whatsoever that they were going to allow one young, unarmed village policeman to stand between them and a passport to luxury.
Bruce Reynolds and his gang had successfully raided a mail train and fled with over £2.5 million. Whilst police forces from 3 counties were left on the back foot, the men were counting their hoards of cash. But the officers were closing in. The robbers' hideout had been blown and local bobbies were now on their trail.
I'd seen a lot of sacks down in the cellar, and if those sacks contain the money that was stolen from the train, I started to think to myself, well, perhaps they haven't gone. Perhaps they're out amongst those trees, amongst those outbuildings, watching me.
But the rest of the gang had left, leaving John and his colleague to scour the farm for much-needed clues.
The thing that struck us first and most forcibly was the house itself, because every one of the windows in that house was covered over. We had a walk round the yard, and then of course we saw the vehicles. A couple of Land Rovers and a big open-backed Austin lorry, an old army lorry. But the thing that really triggered it was when I spotted that the 2 Land Rovers both bore the same registration number, and I knew that weren't right.
The identical number plates had been a ploy to confuse people, but it wasn't just the Land Rovers the robbers had to worry about. Their hideout had been blown. They'd made their escape just in the nick of time. As for Bruce, by now he was well away from the scene of the crime and plotting his next move.
The heat was on everybody, and no one wanted to be caught with large sums of money. So I had someone who was going to look after my share, and he'd said to me, it's going underground, you won't be able to touch it for a while, so take what you need and give me the rest. And there's an old thieves saying is that you can trust any man with your money, your life and your wife, but never all 3 together.
For the rest of the gang, trust was wearing thin. The farm that was now crawling with police was meant to have been destroyed. The solicitor involved had paid an acquaintance to set light to the building and destroy any evidence. Despite being paid thousands of pounds, he never did the job. Their secret hideout was now a treasure trove of clues.
One of their number was actually tasked with that job, and I suspect that in their parlance, cleaning it up would have meant setting light to it. And it would have burned out, and by the time a fire brigade had been summoned and got down there, it would have been a sea of hot ashes, taking with it all the evidence, all the clues, all the forensics.
No end of fingerprints there, yeah. You had plates, which were used, ketchup, there was the Pipkin cans of beer, where they'd been staying there, living it up. I think they tried to clear it all up, but obviously they left quite a lot. You've got the transport problem of the lorries, the Land Rovers, all in garages. So they each had to be taken out, fingerprinted and examined for forensic. Paint eventually was found on the pedals of one. You had all the bonfires that had been where they'd tried to get rid of stuff. It was a filthy job, really. I think it was one of the most successful cases that they've had, fingerprint-wise, in the country, really.
Investigators discovered more and more clues. As for the robbers, panic started to set in, and they quickly found themselves in a game of hide-and-seek with the police. Even Bruce was in their sights.
The desperate hours came in because I was picking a paper up and reading that, just like a game of dominoes, there was a new name that had been arrested the day before. I could almost taste the porridge that you get in prison. I thought that capture looked like being inevitable. There was a knock on the door. Angela, my wife then, she opened it, and there was a policeman there. They said, is there anyone else here? And she said, well, no. And with that, I think I'd just got a pair of shorts on or something. I stood up, minus the shorts, completely nude, and Angela then picked up the cue immediately and said, well, I'm sorry, but my husband's away and this is a friend of mine. I covered up my best bits, and they sort of didn't want to look and apologised profusely and left. You know, they got back to the station and said, well, we just caught someone husband's away and having an affair. Something, as a joke, it wasn't him, was it? Because the photo had appeared then in the police gazette. And of course, crestfallen, their faces dropped. This became known as the French farce incident.
You've been had, son.
Bruce decided he couldn't take any more chances. It was time for drastic action. Especially now the police had pulled in their first suspect, Roger Caudry, and were fast closing in on the others.
Right, team. Give me an update.
I was just debating whether I should really go missing. I was drinking a bottle of vodka a day, you know, just to sort of stay abreast of it. I wasn't going out at all. I had my best friend who retired from being an active criminal, and he started arranging plans for me to move out of the country. We had connections with South Africa and we had connections with Mexico. In Mexico, who would be connected with the train robbery? Plus, I'd read about Mexico. I liked the idea of it. I thought, this is the place for me.
So while the other gang members were gradually all being brought to justice, Bruce was forging a new life.
By this time, of course, I'd acquired a passport in the name of Keith Clement Miller. Well, my pal arranged for someone we knew who was a pilot who would fly me out from Elstree to Belgium, where I could pick up a plane for Mexico.
Bruce Reynolds was a very active criminal. He was big time. He was in a league right at the top. And I'm sure his name must have come into the frame relatively early. Although they knew that they wanted to talk to him, they wanted to interview him, Mr. Reynolds wasn't there to be talked to.
Most of the men in the gang thought the robbery was going to be their passport to a new life. But the reality was very different. Once they had the cold, hard cash, they simply didn't know what to do with it.
Most of the other members of the gang panicked and themselves got rid of all the money. Over £100,000 was found abandoned in a wood near Dorking. Another load was found abandoned in a telephone box near the Old Kent Road in southeast London. So, you know, people were now getting the wind up and they didn't want to be caught with all that evidence on their hands.
Months down the line, most of the gang had been arrested. Ronnie Biggs had been caught, but later escaped. The only robbers still at large were Buster Edwards, Jimmy White, and Bruce, who had settled nicely into his new life abroad.
We've got a penthouse, with it came a maid, and I deemed it was okay for my wife and my son to come over. For us, it was absolutely marvellous. We were very, very happy there. I mean, why shouldn't we be? You know, we was leading the sort of life I dreamed about, a Hemingway existence. And we was going to the bullfights every Sunday, drinking champagne as always.
Bruce lived a high life for years, travelling the world and living off the spoils of his crimes. Other gang members were less fortunate. By 1966, both Buster Edwards and Jimmy White had been arrested. All the main men were now inside, with the exception of Bruce Reynolds, who was still managing to evade the long arm of the law. But officers were adamant they would catch the man behind the Great Train Robbery.
Chief Superintendent Tommy Butler had a most distinguished service and was about to retire, but no, he decided that he wanted to carry on and see if he could bring this to a satisfactory conclusion. The conclusion, of course, being the arrest of Bruce Reynolds.
Pulling off a job like this.
Word was coming back to Scotland Yard that he had been seen in such and such a place, was believed to be using such and such a name, but either the country where he was supposed to be lodged wasn't cooperative or didn't have an extradition treaty with the UK, or that they'd moved on by the time they got over there. And so Bruce Reynolds remained at liberty for 5 years.
By now, though, Bruce was hungry for another job. His time on the run had been a whirlwind, and he was getting restless.
My mentor said there could be a couple of interesting projects if I came back to England. We was told that there was another one in Leeds concerning a post office van that was containing something like 5 million. And in the back of my mind I thought, well, we can always do that robbery there, then we can move anywhere in the world.
He was back on British soil. Little did the police know their most wanted man was just miles away. But it was all about to change.
I thought the fame that I'd got would enable me to maybe form another group and carry out some other robberies. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way because most of the people that I thought would want to work with me didn't want to work with me because looming over it was if you got caught doing anything with me, you're liable to get a much larger sentence than you would normally. Nothing was really working out. I realised the realities which I didn't see before, that to be on the run with a wife and a son was very difficult, let's say even with money. Without money, by this time, of course, I was running very, very low. And as things got more and more desperate, I think that subconsciously I wanted to be caught. I couldn't give myself up. That would go against my whole sort of philosophy. So I was taking risks, and I was going to places where I shouldn't go, where I might have been seen.
Some of the senior investigators obviously took the view that this is my baby and I want to see this through to a satisfactory conclusion. It wasn't until November of 1968 that Bruce Reynolds was located, living with his family down in the West Country.
One morning, the doorbell went. Nick opened the door and the police rushed in. The grey ghost, Tommy Butler, who was in charge of the flying squad at the time, made the usual remark. Long time no see, Bruce.
Don't you coppers ever knock?
I knew I was Nick, well and good. He said to me, you know, we've got all the evidence we need against you, Bruce. He said, you're down as one of the main ringleaders and there's nothing that can be done in that respect.
The game was over. It had taken several years, but finally, the ringleader of the Great Train Robbery had been captured. It was the reward Tommy Butler and his team had long awaited. Bruce Reynolds was sentenced to 25 years. He served just 10.
If you get dealt certain cards in life and you play them the best way you can. I've got certain regrets in my life, but I can't change it.
As for the cash, was it ever returned to its rightful owners?
Of all the money, 120 sackfuls, 2.5 tons of money, 2,631,684 quid, less than £350,000 has ever been recovered or even accounted for. So that leaves a mind-blowing 87% of the original haul unrecovered, unaccounted for, never seen again.
It was also widely reported that the money was heading to London to be taken out of circulation and incinerated.
People latching onto this and believing it said, well, in that case, I expect the government's already replaced this money, already got it printed up, ready to put it into circulation. You know, who's the loser? None of the money was going for incineration or destruction or withdrawal, and it would have been recirculated. The Fleet Street Press was styling it the crime of the century, and that's how it's always been looked at since. And I think perhaps even today it still stands up to that title.
But what about the brutal assault on Jack Mills? Do the Great Train Robbers deserve to be called folk heroes? As it was, the money proved to be a burden for most of the robbers, and some met gruesome and untimely ends. Buster Edwards took his own life, aged 63. Charlie Wilson was murdered in Spain, and Ronnie Biggs couldn't run from his ill health. He eventually turned himself in after years on the run.
Poor old Biggsy, you know, Nothing much to do with it at all, except he knew a driver, he didn't know what it was all about, he never took part in any of the planning. He never even took part in the robbery, he never handled a mailbag till we got to the farm.
So, was it all worth it?
I lived by the 3 C's, cars, crumpet and crime, not necessarily in that order. The real sort of excitement is you can't really explain it unless you're sort of a one-man act. The great thing that I found about it was, as a crim or a thief, was not only did you write the script, you became the star. I lived a life I wanted to lead, the Hemingway existence. He made his notoriety by writing about his experiences, and I suppose I made my notoriety by major robberies.
In November 1983, 6 armed robbers slipped into a maximum security warehouse near Heathrow, hoping to take away with them £1 million in cash.
I thought to myself, well, you know, are they going to just take the goods and go, or are they going to kill us at the same time?
They poured the petrol down over my chest, and I was told in no uncertain terms, if the alarms went off or the police turned up, they'd put a match to me and put a bullet through the back of my head.
What they got away with was gold bullion worth a staggering £26 million. But how did they do it? This is the story of the Brinks bullion heist and the hunt for the missing gold.
Biggest ever armed robbery was carried out at the Brinks security depot at Heathrow. The gang escaped with £26 million worth of gold bars, weighing nearly 3 tons.
This was a huge amount of gold, almost conquistador proportions. To give some sort of perspective, it was the weight of 2 average family saloon motor cars.
The biggest ever robbery in British criminal history.
One of the most audacious robberies ever carried out in Britain.
Offence, £26 million worth of gold stolen in Britain's biggest ever robbery.
Must have been a large and well-organised operation.
To be honest, I was in complete fear of my life and also the lives of my colleagues, especially when they tell you where you live and then they tell you how to get into your own vault. And that is the most scary part of it. They knew so much.
They took with them the secret of where the haul is hidden.
But of course, by stealing the gold, the robbers then had a problem of how to actually filter that gold back into the system and make that gold turn into cash.
Ruthless in its conception, fearless in its operation, the Brinks heist is still the largest bullion robbery in British criminal history. In just 15 minutes, a highly organised South London gang of armed robbers made off with 3 tons of gold from the Fort Knox-style warehouse near Heathrow.
It was the biggest crime or robbery that I've ever been involved in. And dare I say it, it was a watershed crime in the criminal history of this country.
It was a Saturday morning on the 26th of November 1983, the start of the early morning shift at the Brinks warehouse. Security supervisor Mike Scouse had to wait until precisely 6:30 a.m. to open the doors to his team of security guards, Robin Risley, Richard Holliday, Peter Bentley, and Ron Clark.
Being based at Heathrow Airport, we handled a lot more high-value goods. We handled banknotes, we also handled diamonds, gold bars, precious metals, and anything of high value. Every day was different. Some days it was pennies, other day it was millions.
When you pick up, say, £5 million, it doesn't register as £5 million. To be honest, you didn't worry about the value. You worried more about the pound in your back pocket, because the pound in your back pocket belonged to you.
Once in, the security guards went about their normal routines.
One of the lads was making the tea, as per usual, and the others were getting their bits and pieces together, security equipment, etc. We then got the various books out and the keys, and we started to discuss what was going on.
We're going through the airway bills and sort of just doing a rough calculation, and we realised there was an awful lot of gold to be moved that morning.
And the vehicle that had been allocated couldn't really take the weight, it's just over 3 tonne.
The gold had been delivered to the warehouse in 76 stacked boxes on pallets, shortly after the security guards had clocked off work the night before. It was a staggering amount they were expected to handle that day.
The doorbell went at about 20 to 7, so I then went downstairs and saw Tony Black outside. He was on his own, so I opened up the door.
Not for the first time, the 5th member of the security team, Tony Black, arrived 10 minutes late.
He looked a little bit dishevelled, like he'd just got out of bed. His timekeeping wasn't one of the best.
No sooner he was upstairs, he said, "Oh, his son dying to go to the loo. I'm going downstairs."
I'm going downstairs.
As Mike Scouse busied himself in the radio room trying to work out how best to transport the gold to the airport, the other security guards were gearing themselves up for the task ahead.
Tony Black joined me. He was rolling a cigarette. And all of a sudden there's an almighty commotion going on.
Next thing, this voice said, "On the floor." And I looked round, and there was a guy with a trilby hat on, with a gun. And I thought, well, what the hell are you doing here? And a hood or bag was placed over the head. I was then asked to put the hands behind the back, and handcuffs were put on quite hard. And then I just laid there.
I could hear these tables and chairs being kicked over. And then I just turned round, and there's this man running at me with a ski-type balaclava mask on, holding a semi-automatic pistol in his hand. He was yelling at me in no uncertain terms to get down on the floor. And that's when I looked at Tony Black and I just said, "Who the blankety blank's he?" Then next minute, we're both on the floor. I'm handcuffed, hooded, got a good kicking as well. And then I was dragged up. I was then told to breathe in, and using a knife they cut the belts, pushed the clothes up over my chest and put a small can of petrol under my hood and said, "You know what that is?" I said, "Petrol." And then they poured the petrol down over my chest. And of course it ran down over the extremities, and petrol burns. I was told in no uncertain terms to stay there. If the alarms went off or the police turned up, they'd put a match to me and put a bullet through the back of my head.
Unknown to Mike Scouse, Robin Risley was also being dealt with in a similar treatment. But why had the gang singled out these two? Brinks Mat was no ordinary warehouse. It was one of the most secure buildings in Britain, containing 3 of the world's toughest safes. To get to them, once inside the warehouse, it was necessary to pass through a locked and alarmed vault door using 2 sets of keys and combination numbers, and then through a gate. Once inside the vault, the safes could only be opened by a further set of keys and combination numbers. The building was protected by several alarm systems. No single employee of Brinks Mat knew which keys and which combination of numbers deactivated all the doors or alarm systems. But these men knew exactly who they needed to get to the cash: Mike Scouse and Robin Risley. They were the ones who knew the combinations to the Brinks Mat high-security vault.
I think I was able to get my combination to work. Robin wasn't. He gave me his combination and I still couldn't get it off. So then he was forced to do it. They then sat me on a metal box and one man forcibly holding me down with a gun in my ear.
You could hear sort of muffled voices downstairs, but again I assumed that it must have been Michael and Robin with the robbers, because they're the two most important people in the depot on that morning. I didn't really know what was going on.
The codes were changed regularly and without warning, so Scouse and Risley were often required to memorize their half of new combination numbers.
Well, inside the vaults we'd got 3 smaller safes. They had a combination number and a key. I had the key and Robin had the combinations, but they'd only just recently been changed and he couldn't remember them. They were really going to town on Robin and they threatened to castrate him. I think, to be honest, they would have done that. And then in the end, I could hear matches being struck because Robin had also got petrol on him and I'm sitting soaked in petrol myself.
With their patience at breaking point, the robbers were unaware of the colossal fortune right under their noses in the 76 stacked boxes. Instead, they were intent on the 3 large safes containing over £1 million in cash. But Risley was in a panic and simply couldn't remember the combination.
I was trying to defuse the situation, so I called out, "Leave me alone." It's like that during the week. With that comment, I was told to have him well shut up, and I was forced back on the metal box and the gun was forcibly put into my ear, and I was told, "Shut up and stay there."
With the atmosphere becoming more charged, Scouse and Risley feared for their lives. Things were not going according to plan. At that point, the gang looked around to see what else they could take.
There's a brown cardboard box there which had got palladium in. I think they took it. There's also a small 50-gallon drum but cut down, and they took the top off and it got plastic bags of pure silver granules in it. And they asked me what was it. So I just said, "It's shit." So they left it.
What happened next would change British criminal history. In November 1983, 6 armed robbers had come determined to steal around £1 million in cash from the Brinks Mat warehouse. Instead, they committed the biggest bullion robbery in British history.
They knew so much. To be honest, I could have written down the combination numbers, given them the keys and sat upstairs and had a cup of tea. They told me how to get into my own vault.
They were very well practiced in what they did. It was a military type operation, driven by adrenaline and armed as well. The criminal world in London in the 80s was highly organised. They had a distinct hierarchy of criminal, and those type of criminals that were committing armed robbery on an organised scale were top of the tree.
There's a lot of shouting going on inside the vaults, and then they obviously found the gold bullion that was there.
Having violently terrorised the guards, the gang stumbled across 6,800 pure gold ingots, each weighing just under 400 grams and each bar worth around £3,000. The haul was getting on for 3 tons, with a value in the region of £26 million.
Now, the gold was inside the vaults. It was on pallets. So then they said, "Who can open the shutters to let a vehicle in?" And I said, "Tony Black."
Black was ordered to open the shutter doors as a vehicle drove in. The pallets, stacked with bullion, were quickly loaded onto the vans.
I was lying there, I had no idea what they'd come for, and then all of a sudden, all you heard was bang, bang, bang. And I thought, oh my God, they're taking the gold.
I still didn't know at the end of the day whether we would all live or die. And I just said to one of them, you load it a bit quicker than we do. And I just told him in no uncertain terms to shut it.
And all of a sudden, we heard this voice saying, thanks ever so much for your help and have a very nice Christmas.
As the engine noise slowly faded into the distance, the guards were left with nothing but silence.
I then gave it a couple of minutes, then I called out to all the lads and all of them answered, so I knew that they were all alive and in one piece sort of thing. And then one of the lads was able to break his handcuffs, the link on it, and then he kicked a very large hole in the office door, and then he came into me. By then he'd, I think, released Tony Black, and then they got a screwdriver and a hammer, and then they broke my handcuffs.
All of a sudden this voice said, keep away from the door, look out. And this size 12 boot came smashing through the door, followed by a head, and it was Peter checking if we were okay.
With the alarm raised, a flying squad team led by Detective Inspector Tony Brightwell raced to Brinks Mad.
The scene at the warehouse itself, it was in total disarray. There was upturned chairs, there were masks, gags, ropes lying all over the place. There was an unbelievable stench of petrol, where petrol had been poured over the guards. The whole thing was in disarray. I should point out that the robbers had carried out this robbery and got away from the premises in a matter of 15 to 20 minutes. This was high-speed stuff. Crimes such as this cannot happen unless you have someone working for you on the inside. Now, that could be someone that was on duty at that time, it could be another person in the employ of Brinks Mat, or it could be someone that's left the company. But it's right to say that even in the first minutes of us being informed of this crime, we were focusing on an inside agent. As far as the other guards are concerned, and specifically Michael Scouse, it's fair to say that they were regarded from the early moments as being involved.
Until they can actually get a suspect or charge a suspect, then basically all 6 of us were suspects.
Well, being the key man, not only did I have some of the combinations and the keys, I also had some of the passwords for the alarm companies. So I was number 1 suspect, if you like.
Their houses were searched, certain items would have been taken, they would have been interrogated quite forcibly to see if they were involved. They were put through the hoop, make no mistake about it.
Instead of being taken to the hospital, I was taken up to Hounslow Police Station, where they took off all my clothing for forensics.
Scouse was under investigation for several days, and it culminated in the flying squad arresting him on suspicion of being involved in this robbery.
One would ask me a question and then I would try and answer it, and then one of the others would jump in and said, 5 minutes ago you said. So then my brain would start to backtrack, what did I say 5 minutes ago? Somebody had set me up, and that was what was at the back of my mind, who's done it?
Just as it was looking like Scouse was in the frame, another man had now come to the attention of the police.
Very quickly, we made a connection with a man called Black, who was one of the guards on duty that day. His sister was living with and was the common law wife of a man called Robinson, who was very high up in the criminal underworld of South London, was a suspected armed robber, was an organised criminal of high standing.
But the police needed evidence to prove Tony Black was the inside man.
We decided to reconstruct the events. getting each guard in turn to go through their story, but without being able to collaborate with their colleagues. There were numerous flaws in Tony Black's story, that he was claiming to have seen things taking place which he could not possibly have done so. Now, whilst filming this, we, unknown to Black, went through his jacket, which he'd hung over a chair, and removed a personal diary. And we photocopied this diary. This was to become important later. I was assigned to actually interview Black concerning his activities or his involvement on that particular morning, the sequence of events as we built up to the actual golden question, if you like, which was, how often do you see your brother-in-law, Brian Robinson? And at that stage, we introduced his diary, which at that time was totally different to what it had been 2 or 3 days beforehand.
Black had tried to disguise his involvement by falsifying his diary entries, but the police were onto him. The cracks were beginning to show as he was made to stew in his cell. But would he tell the truth? Meanwhile, news of the heist had already made headlines around the world and shaken the global gold market. The hunt for the missing bullion was well underway. But could the gold disappear without a trace? A gang of 6 armed robbers had pulled off Britain's biggest heist with an incredible gold bullion haul of £26 million, stolen from one of Britain's most impenetrable buildings, the Brinks warehouse. With the inside man reaching breaking point, the police were now on the trail for the missing gold.
Each ingot is serially numbered. The only way that you can move those ingots is first, you have to melt them to get rid of any identifying marks. But then you have to mix it in a certain way with copper, with coin, brass, in order to disguise it even further, because the only way that gold is acceptable really coming back into the market, which has to happen here, is if it's sold into the market as scrap gold.
15 days after the robbery, the police got a major tip-off. A man was going to pick up a smelter from a manufacturer in Worcester, capable of melting 36 kilos of gold bullion at any one time. For a while, police had managed to track it, but then lost sight of it. It was a huge blow to the operation. Back at Scotland Yard, the police were piling the pressure on Black. £26 million worth of gold had been stolen, and they desperately needed a confession.
It was a very difficult case, and really hinged on turning one man, which was Black. So later that evening, when we brought him out of the cell again, we saw a totally different Tony Black. It was then that he said, "I want to tell you the truth."
The flying squad now had their man. Black was about to blow the lid on the biggest bullion robbery in history.
Tony Black was a very average type of guy. I would say that he was easily led, easily impressed, but nothing really outstanding about him at all.
He always came over as quite an affable type of person. If you had any problems on your car, he used to fix it for you.
He'd only met a few people that he knew or could identify regarding the planning of this robbery, which had taken several months. It transpired that Robinson had introduced him to a man called Michael McAvoy and a man called Tony White. So they used to meet under the guise of going fishing at Leyland on the River Thames. Black had told them how many guards would be on duty, where they would be at any particular time, where the safes were, who the guards were that had the combination numbers to get into these safes. Explicit detail without which you couldn't possibly have carried out this crime. To the day of the robbery, Black had overslept. and panicked that he couldn't get to the warehouse in time, so he was late arriving for work. And in fact, he had met the robbers as they waited to get into the premises. Prior to the armed robbers bursting through the door, he had excused himself and gone downstairs to the toilet. He obviously, at that time, was helping the robbers into the premises.
Tony Black had committed the ultimate betrayal, putting the lives of his colleagues on the line.
I was still in bed because of my blisters. I couldn't do anything. And I was out of bed, television on, and I sat there and I shook and I shook and I shook.
I was absolutely shocked. The legs went. I managed to stand upright. I don't know how, but I managed to stay upright. And looking back now, I felt sick at that time, more sick than I did on the day of the robbery.
With the help of the newly recruited police supergrass Tony Black, detectives were now certain of some of the key players. Brian Robinson, early 40s, the criminal mastermind, otherwise known as the Colonel. Mickey McAvoy, late 30s, 5'8", and leader of the attack team. Tony White, close on 40, foot soldier, built to cause trouble, serious trouble.
This was a highly organised gang, or gangs that were carrying out these robberies. They were all known to each other. People knew that this gang had done that particular job and that person had been behind that particular job. So in terms of professional crime, it was known to the police that Robinson and McAvoy were heavily involved in armed robbery.
Whilst Robinson, McAvoy and White were arrested and questioned by the police, the pressure was on detectives to find the missing gold. 7 months after the robbery, the police got another breakthrough when a man by the name of Kenneth James Noy was brought to their attention. They were back on the gold trail.
Kenneth Noy was the mastermind and the controller of how the gold could be turned into cash. We believe that Mr. Noy came on the scene very shortly after the robbery, if indeed he didn't actually know that the robbery was going to take place.
Noy was another high-ranking, wealthy criminal with an established background in money laundering.
Noy had travelled to Jersey and had purchased 11 gold bars, exactly the same weight as the gold bars that had been stolen from the Brinks robbery. Each gold bar purchased in that way comes with a certificate of ownership, and each bar is serially numbered. Those bars never left Jersey.
Thank you. Pleasure doing business. Thank you.
But what Noy was obviously doing was buying those gold bars to get the documentation that went with those gold bars, so that he could move 11 gold bars from the bullion robbery around at any one time without raising suspicion should he be questioned or stopped.
Despite Noy's best efforts to avoid any suspicion, he was very much on the flying squad's radar. Undercover police officers had been watching him secretly meeting a man called Brian Reeder.
Reeder was calling at Noy's premises on an almost daily basis. And every time these two met, we ascertained that a very heavy bag was going from Noy to Reeder. Now, my team worked on this for several days and eventually followed Reeder to Hatton Garden. From there, they saw the same bags being taken down to Bristol, to a company called Scadlin. It was their job to then mix it with base metal, copper, brass, to give it the appearance, if they could, of scrap gold, and then sell it on the open market. And invariably, in this case particularly, a lot of this gold actually ended up back with Johnson Matthey, the people that originally lost the gold in the first place.
The gold was being sold back to the company it had originally been stolen from. Now, the police investigation needed to find out how the gold was reaching Noy. Was it coming from one or more sources? Or did Noy already have all the gold? With Tony Black, the police supergrass, they lent on him to reveal more.
We asked him, where would the gold have gone to? Had you met any of the robbers in between us arresting you a week later and the robbery itself? And he said no, and I believed him. It was counterproductive for the robbers to actually meet him after the event. They wouldn't necessarily tell him where they'd stashed the gold.
Black's first test as a police supergrass was to come in the form of an ID parade.
Black would have to go and touch the likes of McAvoy on the shoulder and identify him as being involved in the Brinks robbery. And as Black approached him to touch him on the shoulder, he hit Black full in the face. Now that was intimidation. But thankfully, Black came through that.
Black then went on to identify Robinson and White in separate lineups. Tony Black was sent to trial at the Old Bailey and sentenced to 6 years in prison for his part in the Brinks heist. He served just 3. 8 months later, he testified along with Mike Scouse against Robinson, McAvoy and White, who all pleaded not guilty at the Old Bailey.
It was very tense in there. They were only a few feet away. They were surrounded by police officers and prison officers. I think they were trying to stare me out.
The jury found Robinson and McAvoy guilty, sentencing each of them to 25 years in prison.
I was quite pleased that they got a long sentence because the amount of violence and what they were capable of to myself and to the rest of the crew, they got what they deserved, to be honest.
But the jury wasn't convinced of Tony White's involvement.
Tony White was acquitted by a hair's whisker. And whiskers are the right word to use because his involvement came down to whether he had a beard on a particular day when he met Black. The jury chose to believe his version of events and he was acquitted.
With 3 of the gang now inside, but still no gold, the police were under huge pressure. What was about to happen next would have the most shocking impact on their investigation. After the conviction of gang leaders Brian Robinson, Michael McAvoy and Supergrass Tony Black, Scotland Yard detectives were determined to recover the missing gold. They had already established that from Kenneth Noy's house in West Kingsdown, Kent, Brian Reeder was collecting the gold and delivering it to a small office in London's Hatton Garden. From there, the gold was being transported down to Bedminster near Bristol, to a small bullion company called Scadlin, where it was bought, smelted, and resold back to the open market as scrap gold.
Now, a huge amount of cash, obviously, would be generated by disposing of this amount of gold. Scadlin, obviously, would have to pay for this gold. And they were a very small operation in a very small suburb/village on the outskirts of Bristol.
In a 6-month period between August 1984 and January 1985, Scadlin disposed of a staggering £13 million in gold.
They'd risen from the verge of bankruptcy to one of the primary dealers outside the main Johnson & Matthey in scrap gold. So this was a huge amount of business running through this very small company because Scadlin have to pay for this gold. And the money then goes back to Noy and is disseminated to the various interested parties and criminals whose gold it belongs to. Now, in order to do that, they relied on a very small bank, a local bank, a branch bank, and this bank had to generate large amounts of cash on almost a daily basis. So in order to assist this or facilitate this, the bank had to send to London to get vast or large injections of cash to their operation in Bedminster, Bristol. We found out that a lot of this money was brand new £50 notes. The A24 series of brand new £50 notes.
Knowing these £50 notes were directly linked to the gold, all the police had to do now was to determine how the gold was reaching Noy in the first place.
A decision was taken in the higher echelons of Scotland Yard to insert officers into Noy's premises to discover if Noy had any other gold buried or hidden in his grounds or on his premises. We had to enlist the help of rural SAS trained officers.
Detective Constables Neil Murphy and John Fordham were put on the operation.
John and myself arrived about 5 p.m, got ourselves ready to spend a whole night at the property, if necessary.
We were expecting Reader to arrive at Noy's house that night. We were expected to witness the handover of gold.
And we were given the signal to enter the property. We're over the wall and into the property, John and myself together, and as trained, moving slowly through the garden up towards the property. And when we just about got to the sort of area we'd want to be where we could observe the cars and perhaps the doors, we were surprised by the dogs.
Noy's 3 Rottweiler dogs were loose in the grounds. Afraid the dogs were going to blow their cover, Neil Murphy decided they should call a halt to their operation for that night.
I gave John a nod and I started to move away to leave the property. And when I got to the fence, which was about 20 yards away, I climbed up using a tree. I was able to climb up onto the fence, and I knew once I dropped down the other side, I was totally safe. I assumed John had done something very similar and was somewhere else on the property. We couldn't talk to each other on the radio because we didn't want to make any noise. And I paused for a few seconds while I was on the fence, looked back towards where I last saw John, and the torches were in that area, and the dogs were still barking. So I shouted, trying to get Noy and Reader to make the decision to leave. I shouted at them to shut the dogs up, pretending to be one of the neighbours of the properties where I was standing next to. Then the torch started to come my way a little bit, come towards me. So because of that, I made the decision to leave the property, and I jumped down into the garden and made my way back towards the front of the property.
Murphy had aborted the mission, but something was wrong. There was no sign of his colleague.
I got in a position where I could best see what was happening, and I could see 2 men standing over someone who was obviously on the ground. One of them shouted something about blowing your head off, and it was at that point that I realised this is a shotgun he's got. And I transmitted that to the guys listening, and the signal was given immediately then to enter the property.
With their surveillance operation blown, the flying squad burst onto Noy's grounds.
One of the officers from the flying squad and one of the officers who we'd taken over from, one of the surveillance officers, were looking after John, and one of the guys told me, it looks like he's been stabbed. And I remember saying to the ambulanceman that, well, he's breathing, and I was actually feeling very positive. But the ambulanceman said, no, he's not breathing, it's the oxygen we're giving him is pushing his chest out, doing the breathing for him. We were in like a waiting room in the casualty at the hospital. One of the senior officers came into the room and told us that John had died. That's how we found out.
John Fordham died of 11 stab wounds after a ferocious attack. Kenneth Noy was arrested at the scene. Brian Reader was arrested fleeing from the property.
But from the police point of view, simply because of his professionalism, he was a huge loss, and there was a big empty hole. Can't talk about that.
I mean, everyone was obviously devastated at the death of D.C. Fordham, and the whole inquiry, if you like, had been turned on its head as a result.
With Noy in police custody, his house and grounds were searched. 10 hours later, an officer found the evidence they needed to link Noy to the Brinks bullion.
We did find 11 gold bars on the doorstep, pure gold that had been obviously melted and recast prior to them going to Bristol.
At the time, the 11 gold bars were worth around £100,000.
What was left was to now take action against all the people that we knew were involved in disposing of our gold. Within 24 hours, various premises in Bristol area, in London, were raided by hundreds of officers who came in to assist at that particular time. And we had to secure what evidence was left to us. But significantly, very significantly, the one pieces of evidence that we did find were A24 series £50 notes, which we knew had come from Scadlin.
With Noy's property raided and the gold and £50 notes found on his premises, D.I. Brightwell turned his attention to questioning Noy.
Immediately, Noy engaged me in a Masonic hand signal, and I recognised this, and I looked at him and thought immediately to myself that here is a man that's trying to ingratiate himself with me, thinks that I'll be able to help him, and is obviously looking to do business, as it were. In ordinary circumstances, if John Fordham had not been killed, I would have been delighted to talk to this guy, to do a deal, as it were, with him, because he knew where the gold was coming from. But I knew, because a copper had been killed, that there was no way that this could happen. And as soon as he learnt of my feelings on that, he really showed a different side of himself, but I could see the aggression building in him.
With no deal struck, the police found it almost impossible to get any more information on the gold trail. 10 months later, Noy stood trial at the Old Bailey for the murder of D.C. John Fordham.
I knew that Noy had probably one of the best criminal barristers that I've ever come up against in my time in the police. I understand that the jury were taken down to Hollywood Cottage at night to replicate these conditions, and basically put the question to them, how would you react if you'd have confronted someone, as John Fordham was, dressed in black, blacked out face, in the middle of the night? How would you have reacted? Would you have acted in self-defence? And the jury chose to go down that route, where they agreed it was self-defence and acquitted him of murder. John Fordham, when all said and done, was unarmed. As I've always said, the 11 stab wounds is not self-defence. That's a frenzied attack.
It was a confident Noy who strolled back into the Old Bailey 5 months after his acquittal for the murder of John Fordham. This time, he was facing charges for handling the Brinks bullion and a second charge of conspiracy to evade VAT. Would he walk free a second time?
First and foremost, we have to convince the jury that this gold is from the Brinks robbery. And we do that by proving that it's fine gold, i.e. the 4 nines gold, 99.99% gold. Now, once you've done that, you're halfway there to proving circumstantially that this gold, although the numbers had been obliterated from it and any identifying mark taken off it, must have come from the bullion robbery. But the real clincher for me was the A24 series notes, because after his arrest, it gave us time to look at the accumulated wealth of people like Noy and other associates. They all linked together through these A24 series notes.
The jury found Kenneth Noy guilty, both of conspiracy to handle Brinks gold and VAT fraud. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison.
The only saving grace through the whole thing was the fact that he was convicted of handling the gold. I think if he'd walked free from court on that, having killed John, that would have been devastating. When I was told that he'd been convicted of handling the gold at least and got the maximum sentence of 14 years, I was delighted to hear that. In fact, I was shaking, just shaking with, trembling with excitement that at last he had his comeuppance and he was going away.
Scadlin boss Garth Chappell was sentenced to 10 years, whilst Brian Reeder was jailed for 9. Despite years of police work, the greatest unanswered question of the heist still remains. What happened to the rest of the gold?
We knew that the chances of us ever recovering any more gold were minimal because our lines of inquiry regarding gold and how it was getting to Noy's house unfortunately had died with John Fordham, and there was no way that we could reconstitute that investigation. The route would now be dead and buried.
The gold may have gone, but for those involved, the scars still remain.
The only place I ever imagined that I would be involved in the robbery would be outside doing what we would call a bank move. I never once imagined a robbery would take place at the depot.
Well, I say that was my second. I had another 2 after that. And then in the end, I thought it was time to get out before I was carried out feet first.
You sit there and you look around people and you think, even after the robbery, I mean, the guys that were here then, you look around them and you think, can I trust you? Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, Tony Black is a scum of the earth for what he did to myself and to my colleagues, but also our families. And I hope he rots in hell.
The only thoughts I have are for John's family. I think about them quite a lot and how they've missed all the years that they haven't had with him.
As far as recovery of the gold was concerned, the 11 gold bars found at Kenneth Noy's house was the only gold ever recovered from the bullion robbery. Now that's 11 gold bars out of 6,800 gold bars. 13 million of gold was disposed of. But that's only half. So it's pure conjecture what happened to the other half.
Some say large amounts of bullion were flown out of the UK. Others think the bulk of it is still hidden in Britain. It's also thought that anyone who bought gold jewellery in the UK after November 1983 could be wearing the Brinks stolen gold. It was the dawn of the Millennium, and the UK experienced one of the most audacious jewel raids ever attempted.
I mean, this was just too incredible to be true.
A highly organised and dangerous gang planned to steal the most precious diamond on Earth by smashing into one of the country's biggest attractions and escaping on a speedboat.
And we thought, it's the dome. My God, they're going to strike at the Millennium Dome.
I mean, we're talking of something here, probably 300 million worth of beautiful diamonds. So clearly the people who were going to have a go at doing this, if they were, was going to make them pretty famous and obviously make them pretty rich as well.
You know, you just couldn't make this up. I mean, James Bond couldn't have done more. You almost wonder if that's where they got the idea from.
This wasn't the plot from a movie. This is the incredible story of the Millennium Dome diamond heist. The Dome in Greenwich was built as the star attraction for the Millennium celebrations. When it opened in January 2000, its organizers hoped it would draw in hordes of visitors, but the crowds didn't come. Instead, the struggling attraction became a political football. Just 11 months on, in November that year, the troubled site was the scene of one of the biggest ever heists on British soil. A highly experienced gang drove a digger straight into the attraction, attempting to steal the Millennium Star, a diamond worth a colossal £300 million. The plot had begun many months before.
In that particular year, there'd been two major robberies. Both of those robberies were linked, and it was quite clear that there was a major organised criminal gang out there who were looking for a very expensive payday. One had been down at Nine Elms, where the escape had been on the Thames in a high-powered boat. The second was down at Aylesford, where once again the escape had been down the Medway in a high-powered boat. The common feature of both of those robberies was a spike had been used to penetrate a security vehicle.
The flying squad had tackled many armed robberies, but these attacks were in a different league altogether.
On the morning that Nine Elms took place, they were lying in wait, and the idea being if they stop the security vehicle in the road by blocking it with another car, this particular ramming vehicle, the lorry, would just reverse at high speed into the rear doors with this big pointed article, force the doors open, which would give them access to the money.
A member of the public passing by, for whatever reason, decided to intervene and reached into the vehicle, removed the keys from the ignition and threw them away, as a result of which the robbery was thwarted.
The robbers jump into the cab of the lorry, go to start the engine, of course no keys. So they're tapping around the pockets and everywhere else.
Even attempts to release the tailgate with industrial cutters didn't do the trick.
And then a decision was made by one of them to suddenly say, right, we've got so long to do this. If it goes wrong, that's it, we can't do any more. That's a sign of their professionalism.
To destroy forensic evidence, that they'd actually put petrol into the seats of the vehicles, and they'd wired up fireworks or incendiaries with it to actually detonate the vehicles that are being used. Consequently, everything went up in smoke.
The scale and the execution of the plan was immaculate, something I hadn't encountered in such a way before. And I remember thinking, they'll be back.
A second attempted robbery 5 months later in Kent was almost a carbon copy of Nine Elms.
They were using vehicles to block the roads. They had an identical type ramming point that welded into the bottom of this vehicle.
On the first spike, they'd written the word Gertie, as in a female name for Gertrude, and on the second spike it was written in Gertie 2. So you didn't have to be too much of a detective to figure out at that point.
Interestingly, in the cab of that vehicle, they not only had the keys in the ignition, but they had spare keys taped inside. So they'd learnt their lesson. They weren't going to be caught out again.
And the ruthless thieves stopped at nothing to intimidate the security officers.
They'd actually taken cans of what's turned out to be Fray Bentos tinned meat, sprayed them, attached magnets to them, and put aerials on them to make them look like they were limpet mines or something that were attaching to the vehicles. And it was all about creating massive fear in the crews of these security vehicles.
The robbers actually let off shots towards a police Range Rover, then made their escape, getting on another boat and going up the river.
Two very organised and dangerous attempted raids. Shatford and Swinfield knew they had their work cut out. The pressure was on to stop the gang before their next hit, but this wasn't going to be easy.
We were absolutely certain we were dealing with this highly professional gang at 9 Elms, but they were unable to crash in the back of the vehicle. This was now the second failure they'd had within some months, so there had to be a third.
But how do you stop a gang of robbers who you know nothing about? Shatford was in a race against time for leads.
We had an amazing break, which was a piece of everyday but nonetheless brilliant police work.
There'd been an operation running down in Kent by a police officer looking at stolen plant equipment, and by that I mean generators, roadside equipment. And he had been centering around a family down there called the Reynolds, where he recognised this flatbed lorry as something he'd seen there previously.
We ran the vehicle numbers through that database that were at the scene in Aylesford, and one of the vehicles came up as being the one that was at that farm.
So for the first time, we get coming into the inquiry the family Wenham, and as a result of that and the link to the Aylesford robbery, we started our surveillance around that farm.
The hunt was on.
Now that was an incredible breakthrough for us because we thought, well, we've got a starting point. And we then worked very closely with Kent, and I deployed for a long time down there flying squad officers and highly trained surveillance officers from a specialised unit at Scotland Yard, and they were living in ditches, in trenches for days and days on end. We did start to get a picture of people arriving that we believed to be the gang. This is where they felt secure. They weren't aware it could be traced back to them. It was somewhere to plan and work from, and we were on to them, so we had a chance.
The surveillance paid off. Officers quickly ran checks on the men they were tracking. Lee Wenham worked in his family business selling scrap metal and owned a number of farms in the area. And Terry Millman, a name familiar to the police.
Terence Millman served, I think, at least 16 years imprisonment for armed robbery. So he was an experienced robber. We were now getting into the gang.
Also, we were fairly confident about the Wenhams' involvement, but we always felt that the Wenhams were custodians of looking after the property that would be used on behalf of the major players of the gang.
And it didn't take long for this theory to be confirmed.
One day, we saw a new person turn up at the farm, and he turned up in a vehicle with blacked out windows, and he looked your epitome of the South London gangster. Myself and the officers looked at that individual, and straight away we registered that this was somebody new who we needed to know more about.
That man was Ray Betson, a prominent underworld figure with links to organised crime and a reputation for violence. All the men identified so far had records, but officers needed more. Shatford and Swinfield had to know the gang's next target, and fast. Soon, another piece of the jigsaw would lead them closer to their answer.
It was after looking at hours and hours of video footage where nothing happened other than the normal activity on a farm. One day we see a powerboat taken in on a low loader. And from that moment on, the strategy was to move when the powerboat moved, and that we wouldn't waste time or risk compromising the operation by trying to follow people unnecessarily.
In both the failed armed robberies, a speedboat had been used as a getaway. Police were quick to spot the similarity, but they needed to pinpoint the gang's next target. An urgent meeting was called.
We had a meeting at Maidstone Police Station, all the people, and it was just sort of, let's just make sure we're not missing anything here. where is it that they could be going to rob?
And then the realization hit the officers.
We'd identified a number of possible targets where a waterborne escape could feature. We then received some information about Lee Wenham, that he was planning to go on a family trip somewhere. I think it was £70 or something for a family ticket for this attraction. Sean Allen, who was one of my detective constables at the time, identified that an attraction that was charging that amount for a family ticket at the time was the Millennium Dome.
One of the detective inspectors who used to be at Greenwich before going to the surveillance team just throw into the conversation, unless of course they're after the Millennium Diamond. Yeah. Sorry, Millennium what?
We started trawling through, I think it was 100 cameras at the Millennium Dome, and we identified Lee Wenham arriving, and we were able to track him through the CCTV camera historically to the point where he got to the Diamond Vault. Once in the Diamond Vault, he paid more than casual attention like a tourist would to the diamonds, and he was actually in there effectively scouting the alarm system, having a look at the cabinets, and he was doing all this whilst in the company of family members to give him an innocent role there.
Wenham had his eye on the Millennium Star, one of the most expensive diamonds in the world, exhibited at the Dome with other precious stones. This diamond was so rare because it had no flaws, no imperfections whatsoever. Could the gang really be considering this as the target for their next payday?
You know, it's too impossible. This is too impossible to be true. It was one of those moments where suddenly it's like everything freezes. And, you know, within inside me, I had this little boy jumping up and down, going, this is it, this is it. You've got it, you've got it.
The Millennium Dome in London had just become the target of one of the most elaborate criminal plots of all time. Scotland Yard believed an elite gang had their sights set on the ultimate prize, the world's most precious diamond.
I mean, this was just too incredible to be true. And you look around and you think, well, hang on a minute, could it be? And the more we piece this together, the more it became a reality.
The Millennium Star Diamond is unbelievably precious. It took specialists 3 years to craft its unique shape. And together with the equally valuable blue jewels, they held a price tag of at least £300 million. A phenomenal prize that the police were now tasked with saving. But Shatford had to break the news to the owners, De Beers.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Tim, very good of you to see us.
Inspector John Shatford told me about the possibility that someone might be trying to steal those diamonds. And he said, well, it's very possible the information could be coming from someone within the De Beers organisation, which meant that I now was in a rather difficult position because I really couldn't tell anybody there's likely to be a raid because obviously the police wanted to keep it an absolute secret.
The news of an imminent attack came as a shock to Thorne, not least because of the sophisticated security surrounding their diamonds.
The security we have there is second to none.
These diamonds were housed in a concrete vault. It was certainly in excess of 10 feet thick, mixed with metal grill rods with stone to make it just about impenetrable to bore through, certainly ram-proof. In addition to that, we needed to enter into it and exit from it when the people came in to view the diamonds, so we then produced 2 very strong vault doors, and those were certainly in excess of a foot thick of sheer steel metal. And there we had to make sure we had specially designed cabinets to withstand, again, a physical attack trying to penetrate into where the diamonds were. In my view, and I think in everybody else's view, we had more or less an impenetrable display unit.
De Beers spent nearly £1 million building this fortress and were confident in the cabinet's toughened glass. But Shatford still had questions.
We thought that diamonds must be collected every day and night and taken back to De Beers. And he said, oh, no, no, no. It actually stays in the dome overnight. And then he said, oh, but hang on a minute. And he looked in his book and he thought, it has actually got to come out.
When we have these diamond displays, quite often the idea with De Beers was to show it to nations around the world. And one of the areas we wanted to display it was in Japan. So we were going to then move the diamonds from the Millennium Dome and take them to Heathrow and then fly them out under escort all the way to Japan for display in Tokyo.
That's got to be it. It's coming out. It is the only opportunity that they would have to steal that diamond in transit.
With the diamonds being moved, the flying squad had a tricky job on their hands. Heists on this scale don't come into the office every day, and the sum involved put this in a different league to the previous attempted raids. Convincing his bosses of the imminent danger would require all of Shatford's persuasive powers.
I had to convince my own superiors that was the way ahead as well, and that was not altogether easy. They wanted a really, really careful breakdown on everything that was going to happen, and for a while it looked like they were going to say, we can't do this.
We're going to get him.
OK, John, I'll talk to the Assistant Commissioner.
If we're saying this is too dangerous for us to deal with, we are the police. There just isn't anyone else.
Preparations were made to shift the diamonds. Scotland Yard were convinced the gang would pounce whilst they were in transit. And so, hundreds of officers were deployed along the route, whilst Tim Thorne, Swinfield and Shatford held their breath.
I was absolutely convinced this must be it. It's the only possibility that they can steal it. So we prepared for it on that basis. 2 security vans were going to arrive at the dome in the very early hours.
We put 2 boxes, one with a real value of diamonds, one without. So had they been attacked, then they would need to have broken probably both vehicles to ensure they had stolen the right goods.
We got everyone together and we were prepared for a mini war. I had helicopters on standby, specially trained SO-19 firearms officers. We'd taken over tower blocks, we'd taken over the roof of Canary Wharf. When the security vans arrived, and we thought, this is it, this is it. The vans came in and we're thinking, well, there's no sign yet of them. Where's it going to happen? I think a white van drove close by. Everyone became suspicious. The diamond was picked up and it drove off. Nothing's happened. A good place to block would be the Blackwall Tunnel that it was going to drive through. And we could also lose radio signals amongst that. So we were following it close and we were ready for everything to happen. And we followed that stage by stage all the way back to De Beers headquarters in central London. And nothing happened. That was the low point. My head sunk into my hands. And I thought, God, perhaps it's not the diamonds after all. I've spent a fortune on resources, the logistics to it all. Nothing's happened.
So what now? Scotland Yard had ploughed everything into this huge operation with no results. If the diamonds weren't going to be stolen in transit, where would they be?
I went back to my office at Scotland Yard and I sat there and I'm trying to then just piece it together. Quite out of the blue, I got a call from Sean Allen. And he had actually seen an armed robber that he knew called Raymond Betson with another person, and they were actually tracking them around the dome, and they were clearly looking at the place where the Millennium diamond was being stored, the display. surely to goodness they're not going to do this when the dome's open.
The flying squad was facing one of the biggest heists Scotland Yard has ever seen. They believed a highly organised gang were planning to steal the most precious diamond on Earth, the Millennium Star. Yet expectations of the jewel being nabbed in transit had led to an unexpected dead end. Just when officers started to doubt their hunch, a breakthrough put the whole operation onto a new level.
Sean Allen breathed new life back into the job that you thought, well, has it finished now? And you thought, we're still in play here. We were watching these meetings taking place. And what we deduced from that was that they were probably going to commit this robbery while the dome was open, which brought a whole new aspect of danger. We had probably the most expensive diamond in the world, and with the blue diamonds around it, they were absolutely priceless. So the scale of that was phenomenal alone, the value of it. But add to that the location, the Millennium Dome, on the news every night. It's a government hot potato. My fear throughout was that it will be decided this was too big to handle.
Whilst officers were trying to prepare for the heist, they uncovered other major players in the pack. William Cockram, a well-connected underworld criminal who had known Ray Betson for 20 years. And Aldo Chiarocci, a 31-year-old small-time crook with only one previous conviction for shoplifting. Both men have been spotted on CCTV cameras casing the dome with Betson.
Now, for the first time, we had an opportunity to catch these people in the act, to lock them away for a number of years, to make it safe for everyone else. And in that respect, all we had to do now was play the waiting game and make sure that we didn't spook them.
The gang were going to attack the dome, but its bosses were oblivious to the imminent threat.
When I heard about the whole thing, I was like, oh my God, what else? What else is going to happen in this place? We had everything, So now a potential heist, and I'm like, how the hell are they going to open the vault?
How is he getting in? Is he walking in through the front door?
So the concept was absolutely incredible. There's people everywhere, there's security risks, so I was quite stunned.
The initial reaction of David James and PY were, well, arrest them now. Well, we had to explain we need evidence to do that. There is no evidence whatsoever at the moment that we could put before a court that would justify locking them away.
Shatford's plan to foil the robbery didn't follow the Yard's usual protocols. But this was no ordinary raid. He needed to catch them red-handed in the vault itself.
Part of the reason for letting these robbers go so far was to get the evidence. If we tried to apprehend them outside, they could have scattered, we could have been into a shooting match. But by actually letting them go ahead and controlling that, once they got into the jewel house, we could control them in that room.
And I said, well, you're going to catch them as soon as they enter the perimeter, you're going to jump on them and this is over. He says, no, we have to let them go through the vault to get through the action. It was very important for the police to get them, with their hand in the sack, really. Otherwise, you get 2 years and they're going to attack somewhere else. So the kind of catching during the action was important. I had a serious problem. You're going to tell me they have to risk their lives and the general public. And by the way, I cannot even warn them because I'm sworn to secrecy. Put yourself in my shoes. How the hell am I going to sleep at night?
We left having very clearly, very strongly put our views across, and I must say this was on both sides as well. We shook hands, we left, and we left it that David and PY would get back to us. And I know that they were going to refer back to government who had responsibility for this. And my immediate thought was, well, you know, I think this is just not going to happen.
However, this was one element of the operation Shatford was happy to be wrong about.
To my utter astonishment, the politicians actually said their advice was, well, look, if the police say this, leave it to the police. Let the police deal with it.
Even though all parties were now working together, they still had very little to go on other than suspicious activity. One element of the gang's movements was particularly puzzling to officers.
We had seen a number of plant-style equipment being taken on and off the farm as part of their daily routine. And seeing a JCB on a farm doesn't attract a lot of attention. When it became obvious that the JCB was being adapted from a JCB to resemble a tank, that it then became significant.
We were trying to work out forever what the JCB was for. Possibly, I thought, they might be pretending to be workmen digging up the road outside. Maybe they even had knowledge of where the electrical cables were and could do something there in cause confusion.
As the guessing game continued, the flying squad was still in the dark about when exactly the gang would strike.
We knew that the boat would be key to this. And all we need to know that the boat had been moved, then I would put people to the dome.
But this tactic proved to be a costly move.
We did have some false alarms where we did deploy when the boat was moved, but for one reason or another, it never came to it. I mean, we even hired our own vehicles, and we would smuggle firearms officers in the early hours, 2, 3 in the morning, in the back of lorries.
We always had it in the back of our mind because there had been false dawns and aborted attempts that we never considered that the job was going to be there until it actually was.
And more issues were just around the corner. On top of the false starts, the team found themselves with a massive security threat when the IRA launched a missile at the headquarters of MI6 just up the river.
Clearly, the IRA were looking to hit public buildings. If they're going to hit any, probably the Millennium Dome was going to be the target.
The heightened threat meant more of a visible police presence around the dome, something Shatford didn't want the thieves to be alerted to. But the villains were too busy dealing with their own issues.
On one occasion, they put the wrong fuel in the boat, and the boat slotted to a hole.
Surveillance on the thieves turned from weeks into months. The flying squad were constantly on a knife edge.
On another occasion, when they were travelling up there to do the job, there'd been a road traffic accident.
Thousands of pounds and resources were being pumped into this operation, but the gang just didn't appear to be ready. Then one astute officer realised a key element that could save the police a lot of time.
And it was one of the firearms officers actually who came up with it. He said, well, hang on a minute, the tides for the Thames go in 2 weekly cycles. And we noticed that each time we deployed was on a high tide. So we realised that to be able to get that boat properly in position, the robbers were relying on a high tide. So this gave us another critical window.
And the reason that you had about 30 minutes on the turn of the tide to actually get across. If you missed that 30 minutes, then you were just struggling in the mud.
For once, luck was on the side of the officers. The gang, however, had one problem after another.
They developed a fault in the boat, and they had to get a replacement boat for it. And we did surveillance on Terry Millman, who went and purchased a new boat, and quite kindly for us, he paid for it in the name of Terry Diamond.
And whilst Millman was busy shopping, he bought something else that baffled officers.
We also knew that shortly after he had acquired a Hilti gun, a nail gun.
As the gang were fixing hitches and tooling up, a newspaper got wind of the operation. This was the last thing Shatford needed.
The editor of the People said that this is going to happen any day now. And I thought this will be their news and it will stop it happening. But very magnanimously and correctly, of course, the editor said it was a police operation, so they didn't run the story. That gave us another chance.
But the reprieve was short-lived. The media may have backed off the operation, but rumours of the dome closing were rife.
In the news, they keep saying the dome is going to close earlier. The dome is going to close earlier because of one reason or another, and that was going to happen any day. And you think, no, don't close it yet. They haven't tried to rob it yet, for goodness sake.
And as tension reached fever pitch, the gang made last-minute changes. New recruits were drafted in at the 11th hour. Robert Adams, known smuggler and career criminal. And a new boatman was also urgently needed after the original pulled out. Enter Kevin Meredith.
At the last moment, the original boatman dropped out. Betson needed somebody to replace him, and because of old allegiances, he went down to Meredith and asked him if he would help him out and do him a favour and drive the boat on this particular occasion. And for that, he would receive a part payment, as it were. Meredith wasn't a career criminal. He was running his own self-employed business as a boat person down in Brighton.
Nine months after this incredible story began, officers received the news they'd been waiting for. The gang were finally going to put their epic plan into action.
We deployed and started drafting people in the lorries, well rehearsed again, and I'd given a briefing with John Swinfield. We had Sean in the control room, and we're there with a few of us in this room. And literally the night is ticking away. We can't use radios because we believe they've got devices that could track the frequency.
When it went live from the police perspective, probably involved around 300 officers. Our staff who were going in were dressed as workers, cleaners. We had other people who were dressed as tourist guides, concierge reception staff. We had firearms officers with brooms and bin liners with MP5 submachine guns in, because it was the only way we could get them close to where the activity was going to be planned.
And as the police prepared for the showdown, so too did the gang.
We had checkpoints en route where people were phoning in information so as not to use our radios. We have news that the JCB, which we knew was being stored at premises not too far away in Plumstead, at a coal yard, was on the move, and it was following a van. We thought, oh, is this really it?
Within De Beers itself, we had an operational room in which we had monitor screens, telephones, and we had brought in 2 men to keep a monitor on those as well, and obviously a direct line to John Shatford, who was going to let me know when the vehicle started up. And sure enough, he said that the JCB was on the move, and we were then able to stand by there waiting for them to arrive outside the vault, because our cameras were inside and recording exactly what went on in there. Police needed to know that they had arrived at the vault, so I would say the code word.
As all 300 officers took their positions, Shatford and Swinfield prayed their intelligence was correct. If the gang detected anything, they would abort and blow the whole operation. But they were on the move and making their way to the target, straight into the trap.
We watched the JCB take up a position further than any point it had ever gone before.
But of course the dome was opening and there were people now around, public around, that we had to subtly keep out of the way.
Whilst that was happening, I was hearing reports from my other surveillance units that the boat was moving, and the boat was actually approaching the jetty, which would have been the takeout point. And then the boat comes onto one side of the jetty.
And it seemed to get outside the perimeter. We thought, well, what are they going to do? They won't crash through it. I mean, that would be too obvious. And it's rocking back and forward. And thought, what's happening here? And then all of a sudden it just took off and just crashed through the perimeter, and it is heading for the dome.
The police were bracing themselves for one of the biggest heists ever to hit the UK. For months, they had been secretly following a gang of London crooks planning to steal the most perfect diamond in the world, the Millennium Star. False starts and mishaps had so far dogged the gang and the police, but now there was no going back. Officers had just watched as the gang brazenly smashed through the dome's perimeter.
Mark, what's on 3?
This is it. Everyone's now getting ready.
And then the boat comes onto one side of the jetty and the JCB starts its run. At that moment in time, it was all systems go.
Then I'm told there's a party load of school children just arrived, and they're all in the very place that we predict these robbers will probably go through. So we are then faced whether to pull the plug, and we got very close to that. But what we managed to do was magic these kids away very quickly with the security at the dome into a nearby restaurant. It goes straight across a roundabout the wrong way, and it is just heading for these large perspex doors within the dome. We now go loud on the radio because we think it's too late for them to realise. We're saying, right, stand by. Just get people out the way just so we can make sure that the public are covered by police officers. And it crashes through suddenly these big perspex doors in the dome, moves right around outside the jewel house.
Off jumped the two men who were going to assault the cabinets. They had respirators on, they were carrying sledgehammers. One had a sort of water pistol that had been sprayed to look like a machine gun, and they went roaring into the actual vault where they started to attack the cabinets.
First of all came up against the Millennium Star, and then they got this Helty gun out and fired quite a few rounds into the side of the glass. The other man then went into the display cabinet showing the blue diamonds.
And the reinforced, tamper-proof glass protecting the diamonds proved to be no more than a small inconvenience for the thieves.
The glass for the Millennium Star was to be able to withstand a minimum of half an hour of a person swinging a very heavy hammer, such as a sledgehammer weighing about 16 pounds.
It's reinforced, specially purchased glass casing, which will take 35 minutes, took 35 seconds for them to penetrate with the Hilti gun, the nailed gun, which heats the area, and they followed that on with sledgehammers, and they were through, and it just needed a hand to reach in and take the diamond.
Meanwhile, Betson continued sitting outside, revving the engine up ready for the getaway.
We saw these smoke bombs being thrown, which are causing absolute pandemonium.
I gave a code word, which was Jaguar.
And then, probably one of the best moments of my service was I called the attack with Mr. Shapford, and they were taken out by the firearms officers.
We threw our own distraction devices in there, which made very loud bangs, and We controlled the area and moved in, and they were arrested.
The operation was a complete success. The entire gang were apprehended without any casualties. Courtroom and Adams had been the ones trying to smash the cabinets. Chiarocci had been tasked with the smoke bombs. Betson was nabbed at the wheel of the JCB, leaving Meredith outside on the boat and Millman across the river, both oblivious that officers were coming to get them.
Learning from the previous occasions, we knew they'd have an escape vehicle there somewhere, and it turned out to be Millman in his van, which we found the van parked up. He was dressed as a workman. Flying squad officers arrested him. We had helicopters swooping down on the boat to make sure that was secured, and flying squad officers going to the boat with firearms officers.
Remarkably, as the gang was nicked, the dome remained open. Staff members, oblivious to the heist, were also dealing with questions from confused members of the public.
Actually, the general public was never close. The few of my guys on the way who met the police running with guns were concerned, but nobody was hurt. And after, it's the biggest moment of relief of my life. You know, it's happened, it's over, let's move on. So now, what are we going to say to the staff now?
For Scotland Yard, everything had gone exactly according to plan. But for the robbers, their cunning plot was about to land them lengthy jail terms. And to add insult to injury, the police and De Beers had a final laugh.
When the diamonds came back from Japan, that perhaps this wasn't sensible to put them back into that Millennium Dome, knowing that this attack would occur.
So we replaced the real Millennium diamond with an exact replica, except it was false. It was still worth a couple of £1,000. It was that good. But it was a sensible precaution to take.
In their defense, some gang members claimed there were others involved.
The gang was saying that there was someone called Tony who recruited them, who had got away in a van. They were also trying to make out that this particular individual was a police informant, that they'd been set up in all different ways. It's absolutely fictitious.
Indeed, a white van was spotted with the JCB on the day, but drove off into London. The police have always maintained this wasn't a key element in the inquiry. Betson was also quick to try and play on a link between him and a police officer.
Betson had a brother-in-law that was a serving police officer, Michael Waring. He tried to implicate him in the crime by saying that he had had some involvement. There were informants involved and all sorts. There was no informant whatsoever.
The real diamonds never made it back to the dome, and the attraction met its untimely end, closing its doors on the 31st of December. As the media fed on the frenzy, the Dome Raiders faced the courts. Ringleader Ray Betson received 18 years for conspiracy to commit robbery, along with sidekick William Courtroom. Aldo Chiarocci was given 15 years, as was Robert Adams, whilst outsider Lee Wenham got 4 years for conspiracy to steal. Boat driver Kevin Meredith, the only one to plead not guilty, received 5 years, and career criminal Terry Millman died of cancer before getting to trial. The gang never reached their prize, but what would have been the diamond's fate if they'd been successful?
Well, we had some information, I suppose speculation more than, or intelligence rather than evidence, that there was a connection with the Russian mafia. And we'd found out certain writings on bits of paper in Marbella and false letterboxes that could have had Russian content to them. Try as we may, we could never actually get to the bottom of that, so it does remain a mystery.
When people who have stolen jewellery, particularly and stones and pieces like diamonds, the value on trying to sell them on is reduced by, I would say, 90%. So we don't know exactly what would happen to that Millennium Star. And the same with 11 Blues. Those are unique. They come probably from the premier mine of South Africa. There are no other blue diamonds like that in the world today. And I would think it's just about near impossible to sort of be able to sell those in their original form.
The most precious diamonds in the world have since been sold privately, and their whereabouts is now a secret. But the story doesn't end there. The Millennium Star was originally cut from a rock the size of a man's fist and is believed to be the tip of a much larger piece. That is still out there, somewhere.